Hello, it's Craig Thompson, and this is the Stratford Slice. We live in a market-driven economy, but housing, like healthcare, is a basic human need.
The younger generation's not sitting here going, I need a 2,000 square foot house and a double car garage and 2 cars in the driveway. What they're saying is, I need somewhere to live that I can afford to live. And, you got people leaving. And, and tariff wars that are potentially on the horizon, all this stuff could change everything drastically for Canada.
It's a snowy Tuesday morning in downtown Stratford, and many people are plowing out their driveways, but my guest today managed to dig himself out. John Wolfe is the broker of record at A&B Realty in Stratford, and we're going to talk about housing, because housing, there's a lot of issues right now in the world between Canada and the United States, but housing is one of them. And we have a provincial election coming up, and housing is one of those issues that everybody's talking about. Next to trade and healthcare, it's top of mind. And it's not just housing, it's the affordability crisis, it's development, it's homelessness. And John and I have known each other since we were both in short pants, and our mothers were working in real estate together. Or maybe I should
That's
say
right.
we were in bell bottoms and platform shoes in the disco era. I'm not sure
That would be better.
how much younger you are from me, but that's what I remember about the 1970s and early 80s is the disco era. Nonetheless, John's been in the real estate business for decades, and today we're going to talk about kind of the state of the world in housing, and thanks for shoveling out and coming in.
Well, no problem. Thank you. This is it is quite a day. It's you wake up and we have another half foot of snow, and but we're blessed. We live in Stratford, so we take the good with the bad.
So when you wake up on a morning like this, what do you think about in terms of your day ahead and how to solve some of the problems that we're having related to housing affordability, not just in Stratford, but across the whole country and province?
Well, it quite frankly, it's becoming a worldwide challenge. We hear, Australia's got challenges. Europe does. Obviously, the Americans are still struggling with it, as are we. I actually just lay in bed at night thinking about it instead of waking up. I feel terrible in the
cold
middle of the
sweat?
night. Yeah, some days, it's but it's funny you mentioned about our mothers being in real estate, and so my mom started selling real estate at different points in time, but certainly the 70s into the 80s, and I started in 1992. And I was talking to her just real recently about, sort of the state of the world. And she said, remember the 80s when the market ballooned? And we were talking about multiple offers on houses that happened in the pandemic. And she said she had a couple in the late 80s. The husbands got into pretty much a shoving match on the front lawn of an open house because their partners wanted to buy the house, and they were talking about it, and it became this massive argument on the front lawn. She's like, I thought I had to call the cops in, but they resolved it relatively equitably. But she said that market was crazy. And then we hit the 90s, and affordability became an issue. At interest rate increases, unemployment was significant, and we had the run up of the 80s in prices that people, they still had to absorb, and it took most of the 90s for us to settle this out. And I asked her, do you think this feels the same? And she said, no, this is different. And, and I thought that was telling in itself that we're maybe coming into a different run of an unprecedented run anyway.
It's no longer cyclical, it's structural, right? It's a structural shift in how the housing. You mentioned the 80s. I bought my first house in Toronto in the 80s, and I can't believe, looking back on it, that interest rates were 18%.
Mm-hmm.
How did we possibly, tolerate that? But I guess the prices were lower, and our incomes, there was a better balance between income and housing costs. Whereas today, is it a lot more out of whack?
Well, it's different for sure. So, part of some of the evolution we've seen, and the one thing that's adjusted is that we just don't have a lot of affordable houses anymore. And when you do get the proverbial fixer-upper, investors are all over them. They want to buy them, flip them out. And so, we used to have houses that were you know, I bought my first house for $96,000, you know, and I tell my kids that, and they're like, geez, we can't even buy, you know, 1,000 square feet for anything less than $1 million. And, you know, and so there's this challenge of, you know, how do we get affordable housing? Because investors are circling for this stuff, and, you know, they buy it, they take something that might be 450 grand, which first time buyers used to buy and fix up themselves and live in for 7 years, and then, you know, sell it and move to the next one. But they're now being bought, and, you know, the guys are flipping them out at 8, you know, and so now they're not affordable.
We live in a market-driven economy, but housing, like healthcare, is a basic human need. Is there a way of striking a balance between the market speculation and the need for shelter? Because the bottom line is it's not just a house. It affects the labor market because people can't afford to live in the place close to their jobs.
Yeah, and I think we still have to struggle to get some resolution at the you know, the federal government's taking they now tax, you know, house flipping differently. You know, it used to be an income tax. Now they want it to be capital gains. If you own a house for less than a year, they want to hit that as a gain. So that does lessen some of that sort of house flipping thing that flies out of there. You know, it's going to be an interesting time to see how we balance this out. And sometimes market conditions just work it out. You know, if we're coming into slower times and interest rates are, you know, they're very favorable. They're not what we had, you know, 4 years ago. As you mentioned, you had an 18% mortgage. I remember getting a 7.99 and thinking it was amazing. So, you know, rates are still are actually very low, but we have to adjust and see how that feels now compared to what it did, you know, 5 years ago.
Municipalities like Stratford and other communities our size don't have a lot of levers for how it's controlled by upper levels of government. So what can a municipality do to try to focus development where it's needed?
Yeah, and that seems to be the $1 million question. You know, Stratford's looking at a project here in town where they can. They've got some land that potentially can be developed.
Talking about the Cooper site, the Grand Trunk site, or other properties?
That too, but there's another property. I think it was just announced. I saw last week over by just on the south side of the train tracks, and they're looking to work with another group, not for profit, to develop housing there. Yeah, there's just not one place that we can point an answer to. It'd be great if municipalities could be involved, but unfortunately, funding is tough. You know, we just came through another fairly significant tax increase, and people are upset about it. And, you know, we're starting to become a fairly high taxed area. Something has to give, but like what? You know, it's for the cities to come up with more money and, you know, to make this happen. I think it'd be ideal. It'd be ideal if the province could actually do it and figure out some solutions there. So that's where I think the challenge lies, is who's going to do it.
The population demand is shifting outside of the Greater Toronto Area, and whether we like it or not, there's going to be pressures here in Stratford on population. In that case, why are we still developing farmland for single-family detached homes when there's a lot of available space for densification within, you know, brownfield development within the traditional city boundaries? Do we need a little bit more imagination into what housing looks like in the next 20 to 50 years?
Yeah, it's the NIMBYism right now in Stratford to say we don't need high-rise development. You know, the former Sobeys site that's being developed, and there's going to be 7 stories out there. That was extraordinary. You know, for Stratford, people are, you know, we're not used to seeing much bigger than 4. You know, we had, you know, Tricar Developments came and developed 36 front and then 2 buildings on the old Abbott School. Well, those are 4-story. Should they have been 7? Probably. You know, and that would have at that point in time alleviated a lot of, you know, some of the demand that we had. Now they would not be deemed affordable housing, but it just kind of filters into the pool and would have helped. And so we've got to figure out how to go up, and we have to get over it.
Now, the townships adjacent to Stratford need more tax revenue, so they're incentivized to work with developers to try to develop maybe marginal or fringe areas into housing. Is that true, or is that, how can we sort of work together as a region to make sure that the farmland is not compromised for agriculture, yet we have room to expand our tax base?
Yeah, it's the slippery slope of we need food, and we need housing, and what gives, right? So you look in the boundaries of Stratford. I know we've got a great committee working on the Grand Trunk Railroad, the Cooper site, the redevelopment of that. We can put some significant housing there, would be fantastic. And so you can go through pockets here where there's great potential for the redevelopment, and we just have to understand that it's got to be 7 stories or more. And I don't think Stratford warrants a 26-story building. Like we start to see what's happening in Uptown Waterloo. They had capacity to do that, and they have demand for that, and so they've gone up quite high. They've even got some proposals that are going to be north of 30 stories in KW. That's a great spot, and that's they're ready for that. We aren't ready for that, but we're ready for 7. And I think 8-story buildings, and that will help because we just can't keep going out. We have some of the most prime farmland in Canada, and for us to start giving that up to put semi-detached houses on and claim it as being, high density housing is not a reasonable answer. So we've got to start looking out generationally at these things. And instead of saying, this is good for the next couple of years, we got to look at what's going to be good for the next 15, 20, and 30.
What has happened in a lot of other municipalities our size is the downtowns have emptied out. London, Woodstock, places like that. But Stratford has something unique. We have a unique heritage downtown. I recall somebody telling me years ago the reason why we don't have a lot of high-rises is because people wanted City Hall and the churches to be the tallest buildings in Stratford. You can't obscure the spire of City Hall. But I'm wondering, we need to attract more people to live downtown, and I'm wondering if things like what they've done in other jurisdictions where they have mixed-use commercial, retail, residential, not high, but there is a bit downtown, but it's not consistent across the downtown. Is that another way of creating housing that more people could access?
Yeah, and Stratford's going to have to start talking about parking. Like we're so stressed about parking downtown, and I was talking to Aiden, part of your team, and he lives downtown, doesn't have a car, so parking's not a problem. And I think that's the thing is that we might have to have better conversation with people living downtown. What do they really need? Do we have to have every apartment needs 1.5 parking spots? Maybe not. We talk about affordability, and the younger generation's not sitting here going, I need, a 2,000 square foot house and a double car garage and 2 cars in the driveway. What they're saying is I need somewhere to live that I can afford to live, and I'm not going to worry about a car because I want to be somewhere where I can walk to my place of business. And, and I think that's where we've got to start really rethinking, parking requirements and start thinking about how do we build where people work. I think you alluded to that at one point today, even that let's get houses where people actually work.
Yeah. And the younger generation, many of them are putting off getting their driver's licenses for several reasons. One, the cost of maintaining a vehicle, parking a vehicle, and it's with ride sharing and all sorts of things. So there's a lot of other options and even electric bikes. We didn't have electric bikes when we were growing up. Now you can hop on a moped or a electric bike and get anywhere. So you're right. The car, we're sort of living in 50 years ago thinking that everybody has a car. We need to park everything. So we need to sort of restructure our thinking about how the relationship with the car and development plays out.
There's a lot of families, like I have friends that just have one car, and and for not financial reasons, well, probably in a part of it, but why bother? It's inconvenient to have 2 cars. And so, it's unfortunate the Ford government's really dove back into being a car-centric province. We're getting a new highway instead of having a high-speed rail. They're taking out bike lanes in Toronto. Like, give me a break. Like, that's foolish. It's so expensive after the effort to put them in and to get an extra lane. It just seems like bad money.
When you were growing up, you grew up in Stratford or Shakespeare?
I grew up in Shakespeare, outside
right.
of town, yeah.
When you were growing up, did you envision a career in real estate? What was your first path that you were following?
Well, I thought I was going to be a basketball star, and that didn't pan out. So it's actually my dad owned a landscape company at a fairly good-sized contracting landscape firm, and he was doing bigger work. Actually had some good contracts with the city of Stratford, and I quite enjoyed that business for a long time. I went to college for a couple of years, and then I ended up working for a computer firm down in London, and we were wholesaling. And it was a great career. Unfortunately, the company I was with was starting to have some financial issues. The owner had some beautiful Mercedes-Benz, but payroll was an optional thing. So, yeah, the writing was on the wall. And actually, my mom called me. I remember vividly. She said, "I've got a couple builders. I'm super busy. What do you think about real estate?" And I'm like, "Sure, I'm 21. Why not? Let's do this." And so it just kind of evolved from there. I was blessed to have sort of that parental help to get in. And then I actually worked for Pete Hiller for a couple of years here. And then when I was at an event, I was invited to, I ran into a vice president at Royal LePage, and she asked me to come for an interview. And I was hired to manage, I ended up down in Leaside and Lawrence Park in Toronto for just about 5 years managing there. So that gave me a very different perspective on real estate too. So, and then I ran into George Brown one night at an event in downtown Toronto, and he said, "You want to buy a real estate company?" I'm like, "Sure." So that was the extent of our negotiations. So, George still says to this day I took advantage of him, but
And that's a few decades ago. How many years ago did you do that?
We moved back here in 2000. It was 2001.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A lot of changes in the real estate sector as well, because one of the things I've been noticing too is a lot of signs, not just people selling themselves, but out of jurisdiction agents. And one would think that there are rules in place that protect territories for certain. What is the state of the competitive nature of buying and selling homes from the real estate sector?
Yeah, so the realtors are licensed for Ontario, so we can sell a house in Sault Ste. Marie if we so choose. And we're starting to see a lot of it. So, at the start of the pandemic, I think there was, and I might be a little off in the numbers, but around 60,000 realtors in Ontario. By 2022, that number ballooned to 96,000. And
in 2 years?
Yeah. And so there was a huge rush into the industry, and quite frankly, it's low barrier to be a realtor. You take some courses, and $5,000 later, you're in business and up and running. And so a lot of people jumped in to take advantage of that market. What happened was, though, we had a lot of out-of-market realtors like Toronto, in particular, that were struggling to make a living there. So they just kept driving and, took their clients until they could buy a house. And so they were doing that here. Now they're turning around. The people are reselling their houses for whatever reason. They maybe didn't enjoy small-town living, and we're seeing a lot of people that thought they were going to work from home virtually and are now being called back. And so they're reselling.
Really? So the pandemic shift really is having a little bit of a blowback. It's not like after the pandemic or during the pandemic, a lot of people cashed out of Toronto and came to places like Stratford.
Yeah, and it really affected our prices. Like we saw that. Like we saw houses that, at one point would be like $650 or $700, and all of a sudden they're getting $9. And we had a 30% run up real fast. And we had agents coming from out of market that, I remember talking to one guy, he was from Midtown, and he says, "Oh, this house in Toronto's worth $2 million. And I'm like, "This house is not worth $1 million in Stratford." And so, he sells it to his client, and they got some poor advice, but great for the people selling. Like, I have to admit, native Stratford's Straftonians selling their home, and they saw a guy from Toronto showing it, they were like, "This is going to be great."
So what is the market doing now? Is it sort of settled a bit? What's the supply versus demand at the moment?
So prices pulled back quite a bit. We're still kind of going through it, but we had a big pullback from the fall. I think it's as much as 10 to 12% since October. So we had that ride where the prices actually in the spring of last year went up a little bit and then stopped and settled. And then as the fall went on, for whatever reason, they pulled back. I think buyers were nervous, waiting for interest rates to drop for sure, and because we had a lot of that in the media. And as we saw, there was almost a full point. Well, there was a full point from September to the end of the year. And so we had that pullback in price, pullback in interest rates. So right now, our inventory is fairly high. I checked a couple weeks ago. We were about 135 houses for sale in Stratford. In December of 2021, I think there was 3. So you can see that that's certainly changed. And so it's great. I think buyers have a great selection right now and lots of opportunity to get in the market.
But while there's supply, is it a little bit slower turnover to get the action going?
Yeah, we're seeing houses. It's back to normal, Craig. Yeah. I think, like we're seeing houses take 45 days to sell, not 45 hours. And so, it's really shifted, which is personally, I'm much more happy about. It gives opportunities for buyers to look at a home get their financing properly done, inspect it, and take their time to decide what they're doing. We had a lot of people, buying houses that they were in it for 20 minutes and spending 800 grand. You're like, oh, this is unnerving.
Rushing. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. And so we're seeing a little bit of that. We are seeing people move back to the city. Work from home has changed. We're seeing, there's companies calling people back in, and there's not a lot of job options right now either. So people have to do what they have to do.
You alluded earlier, John, to the tax burden. I'm wondering, when people do select Stratford as a place to live, whether that's really a factor, or is it a quality of life, or what are the factors that make people choose to live here if they're not already here?
Yeah, and we complain about the taxes here. They're so much higher than other places, and quite frankly, there's a lot of other places I would not want to live in because the taxes are cheaper. We're pretty blessed here. We have a really good community. We have a lot of services here. There's the rec centers. We have a really super clean downtown. We're working hard to take care of our people that are in need. And, I think you can take a walk through a lot of different communities, and, it's some of them aren't safe. Some of them, aren't well maintained. It is expensive to live here. There's no question. But I think the value is definitely, top drawer.
Do you think the real estate industry has a larger role to play, like amplifying their voice to, call for changes? Do you think there's a little bit of let the system work it out? Do you think there's a stronger advocacy role for the real estate sector?
Yeah, we try. We've done a number of things over the years, like looking for, in different markets for lower down payment requirement by the Bank of Canada, so that or CMHC, I should say, so that the loans can be still insured, but that the buyer doesn't have to come up with so much money to put down. Yeah, I think there's lots of things we can do, and we try. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of budget issues, municipally, federally, provincially, and so the governments have to do what they can do to keep things afloat. It'd be great if they could somehow get some cash injection to get in front of some things, to help with affordable housing and to help with new development opportunities in the core that, or not necessarily even in the core, but just new development opportunities that could help with affordable housing.
What about incentivizing developers? Like, a lot of real estate brokerages work with new builders and on some of these new developments. Is there a way of partnering and coming up with some creative mixed use residential projects that you're on the marketing side of the properties they're building? So is there a way that maybe that's already happening, where you're collaborating on a project with a developer, or do you come in after the developer's already got all the approvals and there's no sort of influence you can bring to bear?
We're fortunate, like the developers and some of the builders we work with locally, like we've got like T and Construction and BMI Group. They're great to talk to us about product. Some of the builders that are coming in that do bigger projects, they've mapped that out long before they get here, and so they run through what they believe is the algorithm to sell the most houses here, and and frankly, some of it works great, But we've been blessed that over the years we've had some amazing builders that work in this area that build a great quality product. It's thoughtful, like we've got some new housing that's being built with apartments in it, so that it could help maybe a younger family get in. Maybe mom and dad are in the basement, or grandma, or they rent it for extra revenue.
Speaking of that, I go to Vancouver a lot, and we see laneway homes, in-law suites, tiny homes. Are those some things that may be coming soon to a town near you?
It's going to take a little bit. Like, as much as people think this is awesome, I'm going to put a little house in my backyard, and mom and dad can live back there. The servicing of it's still a bit challenging. Building code requirements are still, making it a little bit prohibitive. We actually were involved in a project in Tillsonburg where they had did a tiny home in the backyard, and I think they actually duplexed the house, so they ended up with 3 units on it. It was interesting because financing was complicated for the gentleman that did the project because they've not done it before. So they were trying to figure it out. End result turned out great. So we're going to try to live and learn from that and see how we can make that happen here.
So looking 5 years in the future, do you have sort of like your top 5 things that you foresee or wish for? It doesn't have to be 5, but just what are your sort of key things you're looking for in the next 5 years that will, guide the housing? What do we need to make things more balanced, I suppose?
Well, I'm just happy to get up every day at this point. So, 5 years, we've, we used to model that actually. It was a thing is that, what's your 3 and your 5 year plan? It's the way the industry is shifting. Like, in the heart of the pandemic, we were doing market analysis every 7 days. Now we can slow it down to monthly, and sort of review what's happening and how it goes. I think the big thing that we have to be very careful of is that we don't flood the market with housing. That's a real possibility. Part of the housing shortage is that we just can't get stuff built. The developers over the pandemic, if you remember, they weren't building houses. They weren't allowed to. So we had guys that had projects that were shovel ready, but couldn't make it happen. And then when they could make it happen,
because of financing or
workers,
labor,
laborers.
yeah.
And so then when they finally could get guys, the financing changed. We had that significant price or increase in rates. So guys that were modeling things out at 3% are now dealing with 6%, and so that slowed things down a little bit. Market's got to catch up. I think it will, but we do have to be super, super concerned that we don't get to the other side. And all of a sudden, we've got thousands of units sitting empty because we could have some reverse immigration. It's really on the table that there's, I think I heard the number, and I hope I'm right on this when I say it, there's maybe potentially anywhere from 1.5 million to 2 million people that could be leaving the country at the end of this year because their immigration status is changing and they just can't get it resolved. So we could see, some reverse immigration where all of a sudden, you have people leaving. And, and tariff wars that are potentially on the horizon, all this stuff could change everything drastically for Canada. So we do have to be careful that as we're putting product on the market, that there's demand for it, and we don't over flood it. And that can happen.
We have a provincial election in a few weeks. What are the key points that you're looking for? Because obviously in elections, a lot of promises are made. And what will you be looking for from your industry as we go to the polls in Ontario?
Yeah, it's a great question because we're going to have a federal run right behind it. And so there's a lot of things on the table there. Provincially, I think we're hoping for we've got a lot of things that the Ford government put in place. So there's the zoning's really changed. We have it as of right zoning, they call it. So if I live in a property that's a single family, I can now work that to put in a basement apartment and have that in my home. And a lot of people are choosing not to, but it's available. So I think some of the zoning issues, the speed of getting things processed, and I'm not being critical when I say that the building department is having a hard time getting things done. They are just flooded, and we don't have enough people doing that. But municipalities also don't want to then hire 6 more planners to have them on staff, and then in 2 years from now we don't have a need for it. So we've got a lot of things in the hopper, so to speak, that need to be addressed, and I think that's the big thing that the provincial government just needs to find a way to help move these things along better. Again, Ford said, we're just making this happen. And, and there was a lot of, the MZO orders coming out where they were just driving things forward, which is great, except we also have to have thoughtful planning while we're doing all this stuff. And so I think there's a blend where the province should be, allowing municipalities to move forward and at a speed that they feel good with. And so I hope that some of the planning issues come up and they talk about that, and building code and things like that are set. I don't think there's anything spectacular that needs to be changed there. I think the zoning stuff could be really moved along quicker.
A lot of people don't make the direct connection between the overall economy, jobs, and housing, but you alluded to earlier your concerns about the tourism and the restaurant sector here. Why is housing part of that consideration?
Well, Stratford's a unique place. Like we do talk about tourism and the theater and how it drives the ship here, so to speak. But we also have a lot of automotive. Like you get plants like FIO, and these guys they've employed a lot of people, and then our hospital employs a lot of people. So we're a fairly diverse economy that way. But restaurants and retail. And you get to the downtown core, if on a nice September weekend we don't have people walking around buying and shopping and eating, we've got problems. And it's a lot of why people come to Stratford and live here is our food culture. It's an important part of it, but the tourism helps support it. In the off season we can enjoy it. But at the end of the day, if we don't have tourists in town shopping and eating, we're going to have some challenges.
And the restaurants and manufacturers also need places for their employees to live so they don't
Mm-hmm.
have to bus in or come in from other jurisdictions. And even the students who come to study here, that's another issue for the housing needs. It's all interconnected, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of good things on the horizon. We get this Cooper site going. There's some potential there to even expand the university if that's on. I think that's one of the things on the table. Get some 7-story buildings downtown for the students to live in. Right now, there's not a lot of reason for them to be downtown and to live here. So we know they're being brought in from Waterloo. Workers are being brought in from London, for factory work. Yeah, there's a lot of things happening here. I think we just need to get it moving. The Cooper site's been, since the 80s. And, there's a lot of reasons why we're where we are. Now we just need to get the reasons to move it forward.
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity that lies ahead. And there's, as I said earlier, through crises, often opportunities present themselves. It motivates people to sort of come up with radical or transformative solutions.
I agree, and it's been great. We've had some people like I mentioned earlier about the BMI group here. They took on the Bradshaw Lofts, and that was when they started that project. I mean, what are they getting into here? And it turns out to be a brilliant project. It's it's finished up well. It's fully occupied, I think mostly, and we got a great little birch and wind downstairs, and there's a great model for a multi-use building. And I think we're fortunate that we have people in town that really do see that stuff and they can jump on it and make these changes.
Well, John, it's great to chat with you. Thanks for sharing all your insights. You've got a lot of experience in the sector, and I think it's important that people understand, some of the pressures we're facing and how we might be able to solve the issues around housing. So, thanks for digging yourself out of your driveway and coming in.
I appreciate the opportunity, Craig. Always good to see you.
Thanks.